So in the previous videos, we went ahead and found out about the array list and how useful it is and how to use that in Java. It's now time for a challenge. What I'm going to do is type out a challenge to help really, you understand how the array list works. So let's get into what the challenge is all about. Okay, so here is the challenge. We want to create a program that implements a very simple mobile phone with the following capabilities. The ability to store, to modify, to remove, and to query contact names. Now, contact names are those records for people who have been added as a contact on the mobile phone. So what you want to do is create a separate class for contacts, and the actual fields we want would be name and phone number. So you create that separate class, then you create a master class, which we'll call mobile phone, and that holds the array list of contacts, and the mobile phone class itself has the functionality listed above. And in addition, when we're running the mobile phone application, we want to add a menu of options that are available to quit, to print list of contacts, to add a new contact, update an existing contact, to remove a contact, and also the search and search/find a contact. Be sure when you're adding or updating that you check if a contact already exists by using the name. So you'll just check to see whether that name's already on file in a contact record that's in the array list. And also be sure not to expose any of the inner workings of the array list to any class that's accessing this. So in other words, no direct ints, no using .getI in the array list. So you'll create a contact object containing the name and the phone number, and then you'll pass that through, and that will do all the processing. So in other words, with the mobile phone class, we're only dealing with contact objects only. So we're not exposing any of that functionality. The private methods may indeed do that, and probably you will want to do that so that you can update appropriately. But in terms of what you're showing as from a public method point of view, you shouldn't be showing integers and not using .getI. So in other words, the people using that class, from the main method, from the public static void main method that you're going to be running your example code, you shouldn't be using ints or anything like that to access particular elements. And that's all as we talked about in the previous video if anything's uncertain. So that's the challenge now. So go away and try that out and see how you get on. And pause the video now, and when you've finished, come back and check your results with what I've come up with. Okay, how did you get on? Did you figure it out and get it all working? It's probably the most complex application that we've actually done in the past. There's quite a few little factors here to deal with. So let's make a start. So step one was to create that program which we talked about, but specifically we want to create a separate class for contacts, and that's the name and the phone number. So what I'm going to do is just open up and select or click on my package, click on and select new in Java class, and I'm just going to call it contact. And the contact record itself is going to be very simple. It's going to have two fields: private string name, private string, and it'll be phone number. We're going to create a constructor with both of those fields. And we're also going to create just getters. We won't actually need to do setters. The reason we won't use setters is we're going to just, anytime we're dealing with a contact record, we're going to use the constructor. But we do want to use the getters so that we can actually print out that information. So I'm just going to select those. Now the other thing we want to do, which you may not have thought about, is we want to expose a public static method so that we can create a new contact record. And this will be very useful when we're accessing the functions that are built into a mobile phone. So instead of having to pass the parameter for the name and the phone number, we can create a contact record, and we can also create it without creating a new separate object. And I'll show you that as we move through. But for now, let's create that method, and it's really just a one-liner. So it's public static is the important thing here, because that means that we don't have to create a new object instance for this contact class. And it's going to be contact. It's going to return a contact record. We're going to do create contact. Now this will accept two parameters, string and the phone number. And we're going to return new contact name phone number. So you can see what's happening there is it's really just calling the constructor to create a new contact record. Pretty simple, and it returns that contact record, and you'll see this in use later on in the application. Okay, next we need to create our mobile phone class. We just go back and have a look again. We've got a mobile phone class has the functionality listed above, the various abilities to add, modify, remove, and query the contact names, and it also contains an array list of contacts. So let's create this mobile phone class. New class, new Java class. Mobile phone. And what we're going to do there is I didn't actually tell you to do this, but I'm going to actually create an option to store the mobile phone number, just to put in a constructor. It's certainly optional, and you won't lose points if you haven't got it, but I'll show you how that works shortly. But the important thing here is the array list, and in this case it's going to be array list, and it's going to be of contact records. So we're selecting contact instead of string, which you've seen previously. We're going to accept that import, and we're going to call that my contacts. We're going to create a constructor, and the constructor is going to accept as a parameter the my number, and that's going to be the mobile phone number. And the other thing we should do in here, we should initialize our array list. And normally when you've got an array list that you're using in a class like this, you want to initialize it in the constructor normally. In this case, we're going to initialize it with an empty list, because we're going to start off with a clean slate, so to speak. So it's new array list, like so. And it's just creating an empty list, as you can see there. So moving on, what we need to do now is start implementing some of the methods. And the first one I'm going to start with is the add new contact. So this is where we're actually adding a new contact to our mobile phone. So to do that, we're going to create a public method. Public, and we're going to return Boolean to see whether it was successful or not, because the hint to returning Boolean was in the message that I left here. When adding or updating, be sure to check if the contact already exists. And to check, we're going to be using the name. So that implies that if we're checking to see whether it exists, that implies that we want to tell the process that's calling the methods whether it's successfully added or updated. So what we're doing here is we're going to return Boolean. True would mean that it did get, in this case, added successfully because we're creating the add new contact method. And false would mean that there was a problem with it and it was already on file. So I'm going to select Boolean, and it's going to be called add new contact. Now the input parameters is going to be contact. So we're not sending the string and the phone number here. We're actually sending it a contact record or a contact object which has been created outside of this method. Then what we need to do then is do a test to see whether it's on file. So we're going to put if find contact or a contact.getName greater than or equal to 0. And find contact hasn't been implemented yet. We're going to put contact is already on file. We're going to return false. Otherwise, if it gets down here, then what we're going to do is we're going to put my contacts.add contact. We're going to add that to the list of records, and contact that has been passed to this method already contains the details, the name, and so the name and the phone number. And then the last line is going to be returned true, which means that we successfully added the record. So that's our add method. And what we'll do next now, just to get it out of the way, is we're going to implement the find contact. And what we need to do is, as I've shown you before, we're going to implement 2 find contact methods. In other words, we're going to overload one of the methods. We're going to have one that returns the index position, and we'll need that so that we can actually edit that within the array list. But we're also going to return one that, in this case, we can just pass the actual name and for it to find that in the list. So the first one we're going to implement is the one that returns the integer, and we're going to make that a private because it's only going to be exposed, or it's not going to be exposed publicly. It's only used within this class, and it's going to be find contact. It's still going to receive a contact record itself, and we're going to return this mycontacts.index of contact. So that's going to return an integer showing us what the element position is in the array for that particular contact object. Now keep in mind that the number that will be returned, it'll be 0 or greater if it exists in the array list, and it will return a number less than 0 if it doesn't exist. So we can just use that number to determine whether it actually exists or not by doing it that way. So that's the first one. And again, that's returning an integer. And the second one we want to return is also a private. We're going to overload it this time. It's going to be find contact, but it's going to be accepting a string. So it's contact name And what we're going to do is we're going to loop through all the records and we're going to extract the name out and then compare that to the name that's been passed and return the index position if it's actually on file. So to do that, we're going to put for int I equals 0, I less than this dot my contacts dot size I plus plus. We're going to create a new object. So it's contact equals this dot my contacts dot get I. So we're getting that, creating a new contact object, which is basically the contact object that's in the array list. Then we're doing a test. We're going to put if contact dot get name. So we get the get name field from the contact record. If that dot equals the contact name that was passed to this method, if it does, we're going to return I being the element, the array position number in the array list that we found this record in, and we're getting that number so we can then decide to actually update it if we want to when we write the modify method, or in the case of the add new contact above, we're testing to see whether that number is greater than or equal to 0 to determine whether it's on file or not. So the last thing we want to do is we put a return -1 here as the last line, and what that means is that it wasn't found, and to return -1. So getting back to add new contact, what that means is we're actually doing a test here. If it's greater than equal to 0, the contact's on file, and because it's already on file, we can't add it again. We should return an error because it would be a duplicate, so we're returning false. So that's calling this method here, this passing the parameter of the name. Then again, we're just looping through all the elements in the array list, checking each one, checking the name to see whether it's equal to the name that's been passed. If it is, we're going to return that position. If it's not there, we're going to return -1. So that's it. That's the find. So the next method we want to implement now that we've done the add new contact is the update content. And you'll find it's very similar to the start of the add new contact because we need to actually check whether it's there first. So we're going to do a public because this is something that we do want to be exposed. Click public void update contact. Now this is going to have two parameters: contact old contact, contact new contact. So we've got the old contact that we're searching for, which is seeing that's on file, and the new contact is the one that we're going to actually update it to. So what we'll do first is we're going to do a test int found position equals find contact old contact, like so. Then if found position, if it's less than 0, we actually want to return a message, and the message should say old contact dot get name was not found, because we couldn't find it because the actual position return was less than 0. And what we should have done there is that we returned false. That shouldn't have been a void. That should have actually been a boolean because we're returning the state whether we succeeded updating it or not. Return false. And so if we've got to here, we know that the found position is greater than or equal to 0. And if it is, all we need to do is update the array list. And to update it, this .mycontacts.set, pass the found position. So in other words, the element we want to update. And then we also want to pass the new item. So it's the new contact. And that's going to replace the old record with the new one. Then we'll print out a message to put old contact.getName was replaced with new contact.getName, and then return true. So that's the update contact record method, I should say, developed. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pause the video here now, so it's getting a little bit long, and we'll come back and hopefully finish this off and actually run this in the next video.